Well, it's my great pleasure to both be here today and have the privilege of introducing my boss to all of you. I have to say that he stopped by my office, I think just yesterday, as he often does as he's headed to his office, and reminded me that next week he'll be writing performance reviews. So I'll try to be better than I might have been otherwise. Kind of uncannily, I didn't know what the topic of his keynote was until I saw him about an hour ago as I was coming into the forum. And we both struck the same theme, so I think I'll try not to steal your thunder, but I'm going to talk about then and now. Dan's been at the laboratory now for a decade, and the amount of transformation that has occurred is really quite remarkable. Back in early 2005, roughly the same time that Dan joined the laboratory, President Bush was entering his second term in office. Just a year later, the Advanced Energy Initiative was launched, and he visited NREL to kick that off. That was a remarkable turn of the tides from what it had been up to that point, which was really a lot about closing out the programs that we all worked on. So a remarkable change of events. In 2005, the Energy Policy Act was passed. Incentives for clean energy were part of that bill, in addition to other aspects, and that really unleashed a lot of development in this country. Global investment in 2005 in clean energy was about half of what it is today. I'm sure Dan will share the numbers, so I'll not say those. You might recall that was the year that Hurricane Katrina struck the Gulf, and oil prices spiked at $75 a barrel. Certainly not where we are today, and who would have thought we were going to be where we are today. Natural gas, by the way, spiked that year at $11.84 per 1,000 cubic feet. And again, another remarkable change of events that no one could envision at that time. So NREL funding, there's another story. So at that time, our total annual budget was about $200 million. Actually, that was the new funding, total maybe around $275 million of annual budget managed at the laboratory. We had less than 900 staff at the lab at that point. Just another incredible transformation when you think about where we are today with funding that's closer to the 400 million level on an annual basis and over 1,750 permanent staff at the laboratory. And of course, the campus is a whole other story. Just a lot of empty fields on the campus, and most of our staff lived off the campus in leased facilities, and now most of us are on that campus in state-of-the-art capabilities that are unique in the world. And that was all under Dan's leadership. I might note that that was the year the 18th Industry Growth Forum was held, and can anybody remember where that was? Anybody at the 18th forum? It was in San Francisco. So this forum has come home to Denver during that time. And I think in large part it was due to something that Dan did actually about 2 years after he came to the laboratory and launched a whole new strategy for the laboratory that put commercialization and deployment on par with science and technology. So that everything was a partner in getting from science out to the marketplace. And he also elevated analysis to be on par with science and technology as well, so that all parts of the laboratory were equally important in carrying the mission forward. That has really forever changed the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. And at this point, I'd like to call Dan up to talk about his perspectives over the last decade.
Thanks, Bobby, and gosh, it's a pleasure to be here. I've been, the last 6 months or so since I announced my retirement, I've been kind of taking a victory lap of sorts, and recognizing that we've come a long way and there's still a lot of things yet to do. I was trying to think about what I might say today over the past week or so, and a little bit about what some of the more profound things that I've seen over the last decade. And I recall 10 years ago when I started as director of NREL, one of the first presentations that I gave, I made the statement, boy, it's an exciting time to be in the clean energy business. I think that statement is actually more true today than it was even 10 years ago. And so anyway, what I thought I would do in the short amount of time that I have with you is to talk a little bit about kind of what that last 10 years has looked like, and a little bit about what the future holds, because I think the future is as bright as ever, despite what others might offer in terms of challenges and barriers that we're going to have to overcome. Lots of things to say and lots of ways to say them, so I'll just kind of go through a little bit of a stream of consciousness here. I've got a few charts. Many of these are ones that I've used over the years. I've given, I think, I lost count after about 350 presentations of some sort or another over the last 10 years. I give quite a few a year. And I start with kind of 3 primary slides. And this one, I like this new term that you hear in Washington a lot, BLUF, the bottom line up front. And this bottom line up front is here in the little caption, and it essentially says, energy is the lifeblood of our economic growth, prosperity, and societal advancement. And it really is true no matter what part of the planet you live on, that energy really enables. And the fundamentals around energy is that it's a complex area. It's one that's got all these dimensions to it, and we try to make it simple. And when you hear dialogue and discussion in Washington, sometimes that's a bit soundbite oriented, and it doesn't really capture, I think, the richness of this particular area that we all have sought out in our professional careers. I put a few of the characteristics here. It's globally interconnected, regionally driven. Public policy drives, whether you like it or not. It's been that way for over a century. Will continue to be that way. The interesting part, and the part that makes me very proud to be part of the professional arena of essentially energy technology, energy R&D, is this notion that technology really enables lots of options. And we shouldn't forget that. This is the thing that really changes everything. And then I have learned over many, many years that when you really kind of boil it all down, it comes down to it's really all about the money. It's about investment. We will make investments, and the question is on what and how will we do that. Infrastructure is important. All of these things kind of lead to, I think, the major themes that I think this forum is about. A couple of other things which I won't go through in any detail is it's a dynamic area. Lots of things are changing. In addition to the fact that we've seen this I think emergence of renewable energy technology as part of the mix, the interesting thing is that we still are surprised. When I started literally 10 years ago, we missed the entire notion that there would be a revolution around unconventional gas and gas development. It's not that we didn't know that there were reserves, and it's not that we didn't know technology was available to help us get at it. It's that we didn't know that we could do it economically, and we could do it kind of in real time. And I think that has really changed the landscape, certainly domestically. But the other thing that I noticed as I travel around the world is that that's not true everywhere you go. If you go to Europe, the price of gas is quite a bit higher than it is here. And if you go to Asia, it's even still higher there. And so they are not essentially participating in the windfall, essentially, of sorts that we have. And it gives us an opportunity to be, I think, very, very proactive in terms of how we invest and how we prepare for the future. And hopefully we won't squander that going forward. As I think through other things that I say, and this is kind of the final of my intro slides, which I always talk about in every talk, is we have a system today. And the system today was based on a set of assumptions that are no longer valid. And it had to do with the fact that, first of all, we knew we wanted public policy to have energy enable our economic competitiveness, which is a good thing. But we made a number of assumptions about fossil fuels and their impact on the environment and a variety of other things that simply are not true today. Now, if we can all agree on the following, which is the characteristics of the future energy system that might be more sustainable than the one we have today, which is diverse, affordable, efficient, secure, reliant, and to a large degree gives customer choice, then we're in a position where we can all share the same goal, share the same vision. And I think, when you hear folks talk about all of the above types of discussions, this is what I mean by that. I'm not sure what they mean by that, because I think it means different things to different people. But the fact is that set of characteristics that are on the right-hand side is really what should be the goal, and we really shouldn't care how we get there. And so we should be, to first order, technology agnostic. And if you can get there with fossil fuel, clean capture, carbon capture and storage, or with some form of nuclear that allows you to get that, then that's a home run. That's good. That's, I think, a way to get there. On the other hand, being the director of the National Renewable Energy National Laboratory, I also have a deep conviction that renewable energy efficiency can do a whole lot more than what we give it credit for today. And that's really what we're about. Where we end up is another story, but for the most part, that is in fact something that I believe everyone can hopefully agree to. So I'll talk more about that, and I'll talk about where we've come. So in the past decade, this is kind of where we started. Bobby mentioned, I came into this laboratory. It was a little bit, I think, a lab with great potential, but had not yet reached some of the impacts that I thought were available to it. And the first thing that I recognized is, gosh, people don't even know who we are. Many of them in Denver didn't know who we were. So it became clear that we needed to get a little bit more visibility, and part of that was what I called getting a seat at the table. And I'm going to go through each of these various themes. So over the last 10 years, these are the themes that I've focused on, and my message has kind of evolved as the environment has evolved, as the lab has evolved, as the department and everything else has evolved. And really, it was, I think, an interesting evolution that has occurred over the last 10 years, because we have overseen this incredible renaissance, which we would not, again, have anticipated 10 years ago. And I'll get into that here in a bit. It is really quite, I think, astounding to be part of this growth that's occurred over the last 10 years. And I frequently say it. I've gotten lots of accolades. Gosh, you've overseen this laboratory. It's had this tremendous past 10 years, and you should be really proud of all that's been accomplished. And I am, but I also reflect a bit that the quarterback always gets way more credit when things are going well than he deserves, and way more blame when things are going wrong than he deserves. So I think I'm happy that I was part of this as things have gone well, to be part of this effort, this evolution that's occurred. I'll go through each one of these very briefly, because I think it's really important to just kind of reminisce a little bit. So Bobby mentioned that we started in the 2004-2005 timeframe, which is kind of when I came in, and we had just passed this the Colorado Renewable Energy Requirement Initiative, I think is what it was named, Initiative 37, and it got through the legislature, and Colorado, first in the country to actually have the voters vote on a particularly, what I'm going to call a forward-leaning sort of initiative. Colorado still does that today, as you well know, with some of our social issues. And what was interesting to me was the fact that the utilities, just in general, were not very pleased with what was being presented. And I remember sitting around the kitchen table talking about this amendment, and back in 2004, asking, my family meeting, saying, what is this initiative? Is this something we're for? And it said something about solar. Had no idea what it meant or how it would be implemented, but we said, yeah, we like solar. So we were one of the 53.6% there that got through that initiative. I think what happened after that was that the utilities figured out, and Xcel in particular, figured out that they needed help, and we needed to work together to try to make this as positive as possible. And lots of things changed in the course of that. And what ended up happening was that not only did we figure out that 10% by 2025 by 2020 was doable, but that much more was doable. And it was interesting. I actually pulled this out of a presentation that I gave back around that time frame, and it talked a little bit about what the expectation was by the Department of Energy, the Energy Information Agency, which is part of DOE, talking about what we might expect going forward. And if you look at this chart, what you'll see is that in 2005 we were about 2% of our non-hydroelectric generation came from renewable energy. And it was really interesting. This is actually capacity, not generation, but 2% was kind of what we had at that point in time. Where we are today is right at that green line. which I find astounding. Now, we got some of the assumptions wrong, as you can see there, natural gas we missed, and a couple of other things. But it was interesting to me that a lot more has been done in the last decade that even our most aggressive, optimistic assessments going forward. A very interesting thing. The next big thing after we talked about, I essentially visited with the Xcel board of directors and EEI and a few of others, and started to get a conversation going about the promise of renewables. Again, we were at the 2% part, not that threatened, not that threatening, and even if we're like 10%, still not that threatening. When we started talking about something much bigger than that, then we started having a much more interesting conversation. And, there was lots of barriers about, well, you can't get more than about 10% or so. And I remember going in the next kind of cycle to the Santa Fe Institute, which was they had a think tank in Santa Fe Institute. And I remember when I was in New Mexico many years ago, they had some really, really smart people. They essentially were leading, I think, thought and science on chaos theory. And what was interesting to me was I had just left Bell Labs and gone to Sandia Labs many years ago, and I had seen, in fact, how the telecommunication industry had been progressing. And they were talking about barriers that were very similar to the ones that we had in energy, one of which was you have an infrastructure. There's been a lot of investment, and until you get your investment out of that infrastructure, no one is too anxious to change that infrastructure. How do you make progress when you move from copper to fiber, which is in the telecommunication industry, was really important, when you really don't have the capital to invest? How do you do that? Well, they turned to the Santa Fe Institute and the people that are looking at chaos theory, and one of the things that they determined was, you don't have to build out all that infrastructure. What you have to do is build nucleation sites. You build a nucleation site at some particular place, and then you get all of the people and the businesses and the community hooked on the idea that there is this really fast internet capability, and then you let them decide that they need this new functionality, and they make the investments to actually populate the rest of the investment and the rest of the infrastructure. And that kind of was part of that. Let's think about this differently than we have in the past. So this idea that we've got a big cumbersome system that won't change or will change very, very slowly because of the investment required and the return on investment required was something that I think we started thinking about literally, kind of mid 2000s, first decade, in the context of we've got to do some things very differently than we've done them before. And then I had a number of visits to Congress, and I used to get two questions. I frequently tell this story from the Congress. I must have testified at least a half a dozen times, and I got the same two questions. And one was, so, Dr. Arvizo, when's this stuff going to get real? And the second question was, and how much can we have? And so it was, I got tired of answering that question. The first question, how much, when is it going to be real? I kept telling me, it's already real. We've already invested in globally, we've invested like $1 trillion already in these technologies, in these clean technologies. Most of it's not here. Most of it is elsewhere. But it's real today. And the second question is, how much can you have? It's really a question that I'll turn back to you and ask the question, how much do you want? Because frankly, it is not a matter of technical or even economic potential. It is really more a matter of what your design and your social society goals are, because you can get there. And we started these studies back in the 2005, 2006 timeframe, and by 2009 and 2010, we were starting to get some traction, ending up in the Renewable Electricity Future Study, which many of you know about. And in fact, this is an animation that I frequently show, especially on college campuses, to demonstrate this is the energy system simulated in the U.S. in the year 2050, and looking at it from the perspective of how much renewable energy could you have, and would it satisfy the load? And what we determined, we did a parametric study, and this was many, many authors and many, many organizations, 40 or something organizations with over 100 authors, and we concluded the following, and that was that in the year 2050, you can satisfy the load at 1 hour intervals using 80%, in fact, and more, renewable energy if you chose to do so. Now, this is not a prediction or projection, but it's a technical calculation of what is possible. And what is interesting to me is It was kind of like an aha moment for a lot of folks. Is you could do as much as you want. I mean, I frequently go to Europe, and they always challenge me with, you Americans are always, you're always so timid. Why don't you set some bold goals like we are? They're saying you can do 100%. And so that's the discussion we have when you're in Europe. And that's obviously not the discussion we have in the U.S. But it was interesting to me that the fact was that now not only has the U.S. done this study, China has done this study, Europe is now doing this study. By the way, the Chinese have the same exact study at 85% of their goal of their electricity can be supplied by renewable energy by the year 2050. So and this is beginning to catch on. It's not a matter of is there a potential for you to be able to do this. It's a matter of how would you do it based on the fact that we've got a system today, we've invested already. The question is, how do you begin to turn that ship? Now, if you're in an established economy, the OECD countries like the U.S., your demand is flat to declining. If you're in an emerging economy, then your demand is growing. Different investments in terms of infrastructure. In our case, we're investing in aging infrastructure. In the case of the emerging economies, we're investing in new infrastructure. So the question is, we're going to invest. On what will we invest? We have the potential to get to much greater numbers of what I'm going to call clean energy, and you can do it at an economic parity point. Much of which, in fact, many very conservative consumption economic assumptions have been made in the context of those studies. So that said, here's where we are today. So we started with that 2%. Now we're at this point where the U.S. has over 100 gigawatts of non-hydro renewables. We've got about 80 gigawatts of hydro renewables. And then China's already at 150 and growing rapidly. This is beginning to take off. The interesting part is if you include hydro, these are some of the numbers that nations already have in terms of their generation capacity, or generation of renewable of electricity rather, in the various regions of the country. And you can see some of them are blessed with lots of hydro, so they get big numbers. But the U.S. is 13%. 6 of that is hydro. 7 of that is non-hydro renewables, which is now 3 times what it was 10 years ago. And now it's a question of how do you integrate all of these new diverse technologies into an energy system that wasn't designed that way. And that gave rise again to one of the things that we've put a lot of time and energy into at our laboratory, which is our Energy Systems Integration Facility. And really it's about reducing risk. It's reducing the risk of the adoption of these technologies into an environment that was not designed for them. And so as we think about our public policy, as we think about our technical goals, and think about the innovation that occurs, or that can occur, we have lots of opportunities in front of us. And really, it has a lot more to do with the fact of where's the future going? Well, this chart is an interesting one in my mind, primarily because what you see is the forecast for new generation in the electric sector globally is a diminishing amount of fossil energy, which you see on the left-hand side, and an increasing amount of hydro and non-hydro renewables. The mix is going to change. Whether any one country gets with the program or not, this is what is forecast globally. And now it's a question of how do you keep your system both robust and reliable and efficient and affordable in the context of this new environment. So it is happening. So as we think about this new environment, the kind of my most recent story is what I'm calling the 4Ds, managing the dimensions of transformation. We are about an energy transformation, and it has to do with these 4 dimensions: disruptive technologies, differentiated energy services, the disintermediation of the value supply chain, and then ultimately distributed resources taking on a much bigger role going forward. So a word about disruptive technologies. This is part of what the Growth Forum is about, and frankly, I am bullish on the idea that innovation will continue. When I started in the lab literally 40 years ago, working on renewable energy at Sandia National Lab before SERI and NREL ever existed, the amount of innovation in the laboratory was phenomenal. It took us 30 years to get that technology into the marketplace. In today's environment in the lab, there is absolutely more innovation going on than you can shake a stick at. Enabled by IT, enabled by nanostructured materials, enabled by a whole bunch of new developments in our ability to do research differently than we've done it in the past. And the sky's the limit. We just need to invest. I mean, there is an incredible amount of technology, I think, that is about to find its way into the marketplace. So disruptive technologies will make, I think, a big difference in how things go forward. The functionality will increase. The costs will come down. I'm convinced the era of having, essentially, to heavily subsidize renewable energy is just about over. But the technology, I think, is equal to the task. I think there's still some structural things that need to be done from a policy perspective. But as a practical matter, the technology that will get us to the future is already in the laboratory, and it is a matter of reducing its cost, increasing its functionality. Differentiated energy services is an important one. We are no longer about just building, power plants and delivering electrons. We're now about how do you deliver energy services, the services that energy enables, in a different way to help reduce the, I'm going to call, inefficiencies in the system. Our system today is incredibly inefficient. Now, on the one hand, I'm appalled by that. On the other hand, I'm heartened by that because that inefficiency is the opportunity space where, when you get folks who are not maybe all that crazy about moving in a different direction, you say, what you really were trying to do here is become more productive, more functionality, less cost, and you can squeeze inefficiencies out of that system and make that a value that everyone enjoys. You can reduce the cost and improve performance at the same time. And it's because we're so inefficient today. And it really has to do with the fact that let's think about energy in the context of services, not in the context of electrons or molecules, whether you're talking about electricity or transport. There's a number of things that you deal with. And in fact, if you just think about mobility, you think about the things that really relate to how we just want to move a person or goods from point A to point B. And that really gives you, a whole different perspective on whether, do I need a car? Maybe I don't need a car. Maybe I just want to move. I just want to get the movement of those goods. Or if you want shelter and comfort, if you want accessibility to information, all of those things are the services that energy provides. And that really relates to a variety of things, one of which is distributed resources, and the idea that at the local level, consumers now have choices that they didn't have before. You can actually generate electricity on your own if you choose to do so. And in the future, not only will you become your own consumer of electricity, you'll be your own producer of electricity, and you'll be able to triage that valued commodity back into a system that now will value what you're doing, when you're doing it, how you're doing it, in a way that can actually increase and improve the system. And finally, the disintermediation of the value chain, of the supply chain. This is where you have all of these, everything used to be vertically integrated. And now you've got players coming in. This is the Ubers of the world that are coming in. What are they doing? They're improving the asset utilization of automobiles, right? So we all have a car, and we drive from point A to point B, and the car sits forever. Well, just think about now a new environment where you've got Uber drivers who now enabled by IT, and they're saying, you know what, I'm not doing anything right now. What I'll do is I'll just create a little bit of a business value proposition for my automobile, and I'll move person X from point A to point B and get paid for it. And my asset now is being utilized in a different way, right? If you think about it as a business model, that is a disintermediation of that value chain. And that happens not only in mobility, but in electricity and in a variety of other places. And it really is changing the way in which we think about the world. So finally, I'll say a couple of last things. And one of those is that, so I see this incredible amount of opportunity space in front of us. Now, we do have some challenges. And the challenges are that we have a system. And the system has served us well for 100 plus years. And now we have to look at it. How can we do something different? And at the same time, take advantage of all the opportunities that it employs. And that's where I say we know we can do these things. We know that there's some technology that's required, but at the same time, we need some policy. We need the financial community engaged, and we need a bunch of folks who are really thinking about what is it that we really want to accomplish. And that can only be done through partnerships. Partnerships is really where the rubber hits the road. It's no longer a few ivory power institutions. It's no longer a few national labs or the Department of Energy leading the charge. It is the private sector deciding that they want to do something different, and private sector and money becomes the real enabler that happens to make this change because it just makes good business sense. All the other things are great, but this is an opportunity that I think we can, be green and do good, and by doing well, it's all of those things that go along with that. And this is why I'm so bullish on these partnerships and these relationships between marrying the technologists with the financial folks, with the regulators, with those that are part of people like you in this room that are passionate about what you're doing, how you're doing it, why you're doing it. It all kind of fits together. So the future is bright if we choose to make it so. We do have some work to do. We are at the very beginning stages of this. We've got a long way to go. So I'll leave you with this idea that to achieve this future, we need to continue to invest in innovation. There's no question that technology is the platform that's going to allow this to grow. We need to invent that future. I think we in this room, if anybody, need to be the ones out there making those statements that this is the place for us to go. We need to have access to capital. There's lots of capital out there. Capital is being directed in other ways. We need investment capital. We need expansion capital. We need all kinds of capital that can actually invest in this space because it makes sense. And it is the future. It's infrastructure. You need pension funds. You need all of the big monies to allow these kinds of things to occur. And then this partnership, there's an ecosystem that needs to be developed. I think the U.S. is in a great position if we choose to do that because we have innovation and rugged individualism and all those things that really relate to the way in which we, I think, both develop technology and triage technology, and also our capital markets work. So we need to be able to harness those capabilities for the benefit of the U.S. So, I'm again proud to be have had this run at NREL. I think I told the staff last week when they did my little internal farewell going away party, a couple of things. I said, the future for this laboratory is bright, and in fact, the best days are ahead because we're just at the beginning of this incredible renaissance that I think will occur over the next decade or two. And I think, don't worry about working yourselves out of a job. We've got plenty of challenges. There's lots of stuff that we need to be doing. At the same time, I think there's plenty of impact that the laboratory can have. So I appreciate the opportunity to be part of the community. I appreciate the opportunity to have led this laboratory through a real emergence, I think, onto the national stage. I expect a lot of great things. They planted 2,000 trees on my behalf, so that kind of lowers my carbon footprint for a while. So I'm going to be traveling as a result of that. But I really do am just so pleased to have been part of this. I'm not going away. I'm still here, and I'll be teaching on the West Coast in the fall or in the spring. And I hope to keep in contact with all of you. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for all you do, and have a great conference. Thank you.